Okay, I think we're ready to start.
Okay. No, it's okay. There. Good morning, everyone. First of all, let me please accept our apologies for the late start. We had the technical difficulties earlier. So, but we're back on. Happy Monday, everyone. And we're going to get started with this month's service symposium from African Services. We are a multi-service human rights agency here in Harlem, dedicated to assisting immigrants, refugees, and asylees from across the African diaspora. We also provide free and confidential health, housing, legal, social welfare, education, nutrition, and advocacy services, regardless of your immigration status or ability to pay. And now I would like to introduce Chivona Renee Newsome, who is the founder of Black Lives Matter Greater New York. And just before we get started, if I can remind you to please put your questions, which we'll have time for towards the end, put your questions in the Q&A box. Thank you. So Chivona is also not only the co-founder of BLM Greater New York, but is a former candidate for US Congress, District 15, is a civil rights leader at the forefront of the new civil rights movement, and also a former financial advisor at New York Life. Chivona has dedicated her adult life to the betterment of her community and our nation as a whole. Her parents actually met at a civil rights rally in the 60s, so you can say she was born into this fight. She was born in the Bronx and raised in a devout Christian household. As a youth, her father became very ill and she became his advocate, learning early on how to negotiate for healthcare with insurance companies and local pharmacies. She attended pre-K through college in the Bronx, and the 1 year she chose to study out of state at the prestigious Howard University in DC, her political action was noticed by then Senator Barack Obama's campaign staff, and she was asked to be part of the 2008 Presidential Inaugural Committee. Pretty huge, and congratulations again for that, Chivona. As a financial advisor, Chivona served her community. She worked on the $50 billion challenge, which created college savings, retirement plans, and generational wealth for over 300 Black and brown residents of New York. Since then, she has engaged in protests and activities to combat financial injustice. Over the past few years, she's worked tirelessly, leading protests and seeking justice for the families of police brutality. She works with members of the LGBTQ community, victims of human trafficking, the mental health community, women's reproductive rights organizations, and housing justice advocates. She co-founded Black Lives Caucus and Black Opportunities, lectured students, and expanded Black Lives Matter Greater New York to multiple New York City charter schools. We are thrilled to be able to bring Chivona and her brilliance to this symposium and in its way to African Services Committee. Chivona, and I will hand it over to you. And again, thank you so very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you. How are you? Okay, good. Perfect. Thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you for the very warm welcome and the introduction. Thank you to Nick, everyone who's just been helping behind the scenes. And I'm so honored and humbled just to come here today and share my small story. I share a small part about how I am changing the world. My bio feels like it covers a lot, but I would just like to delve deeper into it. It's so much, and I'm so grateful for all the things that have allowed me to become a servant of the community. I feel that I am truly doing God's work, and it's crazy when you look. I'm pushing 40 now, but when you look into your early 20s and you look at your life, and if we have the younger folks tuning in, it kind of all makes sense. And I hope that my story will just, as I do my life work, I hope that it inspires you to be the change that you want to see. When I say that activism is in my blood, I have to talk about my parents. I have to talk about how they were raised below the Mason-Dixon line, how they're both Southerners, and how two parts of white supremacy and oppression led them here to the Bronx, to New York, where they made me and my amazing brother, Hawk Newsome. We'll start with my mother. Great Southern belle, but her upbringing, being raised in a town where her father was a business owner, that led to envy and jealousy. And as we see in places like Tulsa, Oklahoma, or Rosewood, or anywhere that there was Black economics happening, it causes great violence. It causes great anger among white supremacy. So my mother's journey to New York, it came by a way of hiding along the interstate. The sheriff of that town was a very proud Ku Klux Klan member, and he was very jealous of my grandfather, so he would shoot through his home. So we're talking about the early mid 1950s. Racism, and it's very hard for me to speak about, but racism, white supremacy, is what led my mother to New York. My father's story, a little different. It affects how white supremacy is systemic, how oppression is systemic. He was raised in a town that did not have quality education, did not believe that Black people should be more than farm workers or sharecroppers. So his mother moved him to New York to get a better education. And that's where their story began. It began, they were protesting late 60s for Black history to be taught by Black people at Roosevelt High School in the Bronx. It's right across the street from Fordham University, where I had matriculated. So he sees her in the window. My mom's a little hesitant to come down, although she had attended all the Black Panther meetings. She was a Black Panther affiliate. But you know that way, if you go to school, you listen to your parents. But my father saw her out of the window. He's like, come down, leave that racist class, join us in the fight. And that's absolutely what my mom did. So it was history from there. I think this is where the root of activism came, and I want to delve into how multifaceted activism actually is. My parents were very, very pro-Black. I remember being gifted before the Mayflower. And with that being said, we'd have these kitchen table kind of round table talks. And in those talks, we discussed current events. We discussed the current state of Black America. And most importantly, what it meant to be a Black person. Because to understand, our families to understand that I was raised in the South Bronx. This is one of the nation's poorest congressional districts. Very diverse community, very hardworking, but also very, very poor. But in my home, it was filled with love. It was filled with Christ. It was filled with absolute Black power. And our activism here, my parents weren't dragging us to rallies, to protest. My dad was organizing the other dads to spend time with their children, to take them to Yankee games, to take them to the pools. My mother was helping to organize clothing drives and go to women's domestic violence shelters. She was also an educator. So I think that's where it's rooted, because truly activism is about serving the community. It's about standing up and doing the right thing. And that can mean from helping your elderly neighbor with groceries, or it can get to where I am on the other end of the spectrum in terms of freedom fighting and standing at the front lines and saying no more, give us housing, give us education, give us an amazing quality of life. And I think that was instilled in me, and that's how I ended up. Thank you, Amanda, for the congratulations on that. That was a huge deal to be a part of President Obama's inaugural committee. I think I knew early on, because everyone has their shift and their shape. I always knew that nothing happened for marginalized people unless there was legislation in place. I'll get to how I ran for Congress and how that all came about, but it was definitely a journey. Understanding that the power truly lied in the pen. Yes, of course, sometimes we need violence because that is the way of the world as we see it on television. But here in America, if it were not for laws, my parents would still be living in a segregated South. People who look like me would still be in bondage and still be enslaved. So I started out with the Obama campaign, and before that, I'm gonna sound like a dinosaur, John Kerry's campaign. That was the first time that my activism led me into politics. And if you would have asked at that point, if you would have asked the 17-year-old who's on a bus with complete strangers canvassing, or the 20-something-year-old who was leading a team at President Obama's Presidential Inaugural Committee, did I ever think that I would be here? Did I ever think that I would be at this point where my voice truly makes a difference, where I can see the difference in legislation? I would have told you no, but my story, it all kind of works out and makes sense. So my degree was in economics, because I truly feel that, just like Martin Luther King, that poverty is the mother of our problems, that poverty is the reason that the government oppresses us, is the reason that our voices are silent. So working, my college degree led me into finance. I knew that to save our people, and this is still a part of our mission now, that it would become economically. And if you see why other communities have wealth, why white folks have wealth, it was two things. It was them being able to purchase homes, and also them being able to have life insurance to pass along generational wealth. Black folk being excluded from those programs used to move along white folk, to ensure their wealth and to attain their power. It's the reason why we're still currently in the wealth gap. It's the reason why we have zero average wealth, because those families that were allowed to participate in those programs currently have 500,000 in wealth. So when Black folks look at their life and they work really hard and they can't understand why they don't have their version of whatever the American dream may be, it was all by design. So knowing this, I believe that if something can be created to oppress us, we can dismantle that system. So that is why my fight is against white supremacy and systemic racism. I think that activism is truly about finding your purpose and your path. It's finding what works for you. Like, yes, I enjoy having fights with world leaders. I enjoy going to Minneapolis. I enjoy doing these things, but it's about finding the right purpose for you. So my time, and I'm gonna get into our organization. Nick, can you show that video? Because I know I'm being really mild-mannered and calm. It's early, I'm on half a cup of coffee, but I would really love for you to see what the fight looked like when we got back from fighting for George Floyd.
Sure, I'll bring that up.
So just to give you guys a heads up while Nick is cluing the video, this is about 72 hours after the world had seen the video of George Floyd being murdered.
In New York. Newsome, and I'm the co-founder of Black Lives Matter Greater New York. Black Lives Matter. 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 Black Lives Matter.
No, today, I just want to say something. A week ago,
Today at noon, I got on the plane from Minneapolis. This weekend, these last few days, I spent where George Floyd lost his life. The love there was overwhelming. Do not let this media make you think that we are looting, that we are harming each other. It's not true. We are strong, resilient people demanding justice. We are demanding. People have been oppressed for 400 years. We are tired of hashtags. Amen. We are tired of politicians selling us out and making us promises and telling us to wait. We are tired of waiting. Right. We demand justice. Right now, this is the beginning of a revolution. Now is the time that we reclaim our power. Now is the time we take back the strength they tried to steal from us.
Amen, sis. Tell them again.
When we stood up and fought back, shit changed. Right. They arrested that officer. We need the other 3 arrested. We need legislation. Protecting the NYPD. He's pandered his black son around and black white to get our vote. But what has he given our people?
Not a damn thing.
Governor Cuomo, he paid us a lot of lip service, but where's an executive order to make it a felony when officers kill us?
Tell them again.
You want to know why these politicians don't give us justice? Because Pat Lynch, the devil himself, his brother funds all of the Democratic campaigns in this city. So when you see politicians standing there at press conferences demanding you justice, promising you justice, they're bought and sold already. The only people who can save us is ourselves.
Right? That's right. That's right.
We have nothing to lose without change.
Amen.
We are powerful. We are strong, just like the people who came before.
No.
When did they fool us into thinking that we were powerless?
Say it again. No.
Look at tonight. Look at this young, old, black, white. We are here because we know that it's wrong to see a black man murdered. We knew that it was wrong to see a knee in the neck of George Floyd.
Oh.
Now, that's the question. When the hashtags die, when the protests stop being fun, will you still come out? Will you still demand justice?
Hell yeah!
We need to organize our community. We need economic development. We need education.
Yes!
We need to end the wealth disparity.
Yes!
We need to own something in this country.
Tell them!
If we come out of this pandemic with nothing more than a few IG stories and a few pictures to post on our walls, then we have lost.
Yes, right.
We have disappointed Eric Gardner.
Yes, ma'am.
We have disappointed George Floyd.
Right.
We have let down Philando
Yes,
Castile.
right.
We must, Breonna Taylor, I won't forget you, sis. I know the media has tried to deny a black woman her justice.
No.
Say her name.
Breonna Taylor.
Say her name.
Breonna Taylor.
Say her name.
Breonna Taylor.
Now we must organize. We at Black Lives Matter Parade in New York are laying out a blueprint to organize all of your communities. What you've done tonight, how you've organized, you've mobilized, you've gotten your point across, you've shown your strength. You stood up to the biggest gang in the world. The NYPD. We are warriors. And I'm proud to fight with you. So when I say black lives, y'all say matter. Black lives matter. Black lives matter. Black lives matter. Newsome, and I'm the
Thank you, Nick. That was a very pivotal point for me, even though our organization had already been founded. Just to give you a little bit of intensity of what was behind it, if you missed a few choppy pieces. When George Floyd's video was due to release, Black Lives Matter Minneapolis contacted us. And just to be crystal clear, our organization, Black Lives Matter Greater New York, was founded by me and my brother, Hawk Newsome. And we have always been completely independent of the global network. There are times that we worked with network chapters, but we've remained wholly independent. And the reason for that is, even although we respect the work of others and what they do, we understood that police brutality, systemic oppression needed a radical and revolutionary response. We knew that this war, because yes, it's a war on the poor, it's a war on poverty, it's a war on Black folk. We knew that this would not change unless we met our oppressors with the same type of energy. So going back to what had happened with George Floyd, Minneapolis BLM chapter reached out and they said the video was being released and they needed some assistance running their social media because they would be heavily on the ground protesting. So we're leading this live feed, we're all working on it, and after the first night of protest, excuse me, after the first night of protest, they had reached out again and they said, we need your help on the ground. So within a matter of 48 hours, our team assembled about 10 of us, and we headed out to what is now known as George Floyd Square. When we got there, it seemed as if it would be this peaceful morning, a celebration of his life and absolutely a demand of justice. We had marched around the day, said prayers, worked with local activists. It's always important to check in to let people know that we respect your city, we respect your town, and we want to be here to offer any assistance that we possibly could. And we went back to the hotel, and then that night, we went out to protest again. And as you may have seen the images on the news, Wells Fargo was burning, Bank of America was burning, there was a curfew happening. Going back to what I was telling you about being a financial advisor, yes, always being a freedom fighter, always being on the front lines, I never thought I'd be in like a war zone where it would absolutely be the people against an unjust and cruel government. And that's what Minneapolis was. That was my taste of that. That was the popping of a cherry, so to speak, because it's very different when you're protesting and you face arrest as opposed to you're turning a corner while there are thousands of people on the street and you're met by a firing squad. You're met by police officers who had abandoned precincts, who were out for blood and out for justice. I always thought myself to be an intellect or a student of history, but at that moment with guns pointing at you and you're being told to get down on the ground, and you know if you actually kneel, you would never make it up. I think that was the realest point of activism for me. We ran, to be quite honest. There are times when they're fight or flight, and that was one of the times. So we made it back to our hotel after trying to find our vehicle for an hour and a half. And when we woke up that morning, I'll never forget, I'm sitting in the middle of bed, I'm watching CNN, and they're blaming this on outside agitators. My brother comes to the room, he's holding a copy of the New York Times, and someone wrote BLM and Y on the wall because they were happy we were out there. We don't believe in policing protesters. We understand that people behave how they feel necessary to the injustice they're experiencing. And then Donald Trump got on the news. This was a very beginning of a very serious and severe fight with our former president, and he blamed outside agitators. So it was looking like all the fires, all the things that burned, although we went there to stand and support and be on the ground with our brothers and sisters in the struggle, we were being blamed for this. Elle magazine had actually did a really great timeline of chronicling my fight that day, my days, that weeks. And we knew we were sitting ducks to sit in Minneapolis for another 24 hours. And when I tell you, I never thought in all my wildest dreams that I would be on the run. That's the fight that activism taken. When you think about the freedom fighters, when you think about Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad, we ended up driving an hour away and was hidden down the lodge. We had to do like recon and walk around. There were mysterious cars, and it's weird. It's something that kicks in with leadership. Although you would not, and I'm sure many people have been placed in this situation, if asked, you think you'd be afraid, you think you clamor, you think these things would happen, but you think about your team, you think about what you're fighting for, and you find this strength and courage that you never thought that you would possibly have. And that's been the fight of Black Lives Matter, Greater New York. Thank God I made it back there with no arrest or anything, no bodily harm. But the video that we just watched, I've been back in New York about 3 hours. And that's when the city here was also on fire. That's when police cars were getting damaged. Glass was breaking. Just to give you a little bit of heads up, because when you do this fight and you do this work, because I want to have a very candid conversation, the world tends to hate you. If we looked at the poll ratings of Malcolm X, of Martin Luther King, they were not loved until the world tried to whitewash them decades later. Whenever I organize a march, whenever my face is on a flyer, it leads to tons of police surveillance. You're talking about tactical units that were created post 9/11. They follow my vehicle. So that night when we arrived, I'd never been confronted back in New York, that night of that video. I'd never been confronted by white supremacists. Huge shout out to my team for always keeping me safe. I never had someone, before I given that speech, about an hour and a half or so before, been called a nigger. There were people with dogs who were screaming white supremacist things. And a part about marching and rallying is, especially when it's all colors and all people coming together to say no to injustice, it's very hard to tell who is a friend or who is a foe. But you pray, being a Christian helps, that you're protected, that you're guided. And this is what you have to rely on, because if you would have asked prior my life experience, would I have to go in public with armor? Would my vehicle have to be armored as well? Would I've had to learn how to shoot all kinds of weapons and tactical train? But to do the fight for the people, I have to be alive to do that. And that's what George Floyd changed. If we see with the polarization of America, I think we kind of saw in the beginning of it with Obama, the hatred President Obama had received. And we know that Donald Trump has driven all Black folk apart. We saw that there. So a month or so after that, I ran for Congress, and I definitely want to talk about my road to Congress. But Donald Trump threatened my brother and my organization on Twitter. And that's what has led to the change in lifestyle, the profile. He threatened our organization with insurrection, sedition, and pretty much all the crimes punishable by a firing squad in the United States Constitution. If you're familiar, there are not very many crimes listed and outlined. So white supremacy in the fight for it, it gets very dangerous to be an activist like us. We have people who don't stand aside. If you follow any of our work in our organization, I am a radical revolutionary. And it doesn't make establishment folks happy. It doesn't make government leaders happy. And it damn sure, doesn't make racists very happy. But I think that that's what's so important about our organization. We've been able to accomplish some great things. In the wake of George Floyd's death, former governor reached out, Governor Cuomo, and he said, how can we rectify this? How can we begin to make this right? Because we realize now, and you see Black Lives Matter becoming a more popular topic in the press as we approach election years, as we have midterm elections or general elections. Politicians are way more flexible in passing laws for Black folks, even though Black folks carry the absolute power of the vote. So out of the 24-point pieces of legislation that my organization came up with in the wake of George Floyd, about 7 of those bills have been passed. Most of them are police reform bills. They came out under the Say Her Name Act. The push to end qualified immunity, the repealing of 50A, which is releasing the records of police officers' misconduct. But what else has come out our organization, out of a movement of people. Politicians have come out of that. We were the first organization to endorse Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez before she became this huge megastar. We created Black Lives Caucus because we knew that we couldn't rely on a hashtag to ensure justice for Black people. We knew that we needed politicians, although you hear us saying many things about calling them career politicians, but we knew we needed some to get some legislation passed. I think the Black Lives Caucus is the reason why I ran for Congress, because I grew a little tired of having a middleman. I grew a little tired of waiting for the government to come save us. And just to put this in the term of time and frame, when I ran for Congress, it was during the COVID pandemic. It was during the Great Awakening after the murder, during the murder of George Floyd. It was a very uneasy and unstable time. And if you'd asked me years ago, did I ever dream of being a politician? Looking back now, I can say, oh yeah, it made sense. But no, I ran Black Lives Matter Greater New York from behind the scenes. I was not the face of it. I was strategy, I was policy, I was organizing, doing those behind the scene things that ensures that an organization runs. And that's why it's so important, and it ties into like faith as well, to be led, to understand that your calling may not be where you would imagine it to be. The reason why I ran for Congress and why running for Congress was such an important part of movement work. It wasn't for fame, it was absolutely for power, the power to write laws for people who look like me, for anyone who's been marginalized and oppressed. So running for Congress in New York's 15th district was completely and always about the people. I'll never forget my first press conference. They had to shove me in front of the camera because I was so used to being behind the scenes and snapping photos and preparing communication statements that I was nervous, to tell you the truth. So it was about all of the work that you do for the people. It's not about you. It's not about your ego. It's not about your fear. It's not about the limitations or the boundaries that you created. In hindsight, we're about to cue Nick the campaign video, a short little video, and you'll see why my candidacy was so revolutionary compared to people who ran before me. Nick, can you cue that video?
Do we need another career politician? Or do we need a revolutionary leader who is going to be unapologetic? Who will be there when people are murdered? Who will be there when people are hungry? Who will be there when it's not trendy? Are they going to be there? An elected civilian review board offers the level of accountability that our city needs. There will be no discrimination. Citizens of the Bronx and other boroughs would elect people like them. A committee appointed by the police commissioner, the mayor, and the city council will forever be biased and ineffective. And most frightening, it is untouchable. Let's be real, the numbers don't lie. We are the 4th congressional district. We are the bottom. But that does not mean we are not resilient. We can overcome. My name is Chivona Newsome, and I was born and raised in the Bronx, and I stand with the people who live and work here every day. I'm Chivona Newsome, and I approve this message.
Yeah, so we didn't have too many politicians running around calling out the government and doing it in a leather motorcycle jacket. That campaign was so special because people ask, like, what have you done since Congress? Or people would ask me on the campaign trail, what do you plan to do? It's crazy how God leads you and life takes a plan. I think losing the election Losing the election was one of the greatest things that happened to me. It allowed me to feed 50,000 people, to do disaster relief in a multitude of countries. It allowed us to create Black opportunities. And before we get into Q&A, which I'm very excited about, because it's always weird for me just to keep talking without the interaction, but I want to talk about Black opportunities. And I'm not sure if you can see it in this, but I'm wearing like the Black Wolf shirt. And what it represents is there are no lone wolves. It's actually a rarity. And if they're doing that, they're looking for a new tribe or a new family. And that's what it's going to take for Black folks across the whole diaspora to do. We're going to have to recognize that it is white supremacy that keeps us divided, that for true unity to happen, we must have Black unity among the globe. We must have it to start in our communities. This is why we've opened up a Montessori school, the Bronx's only Montessori school, and our children are receiving a $50,000 education. We've been in operation for about 2 years with that. But what we're constantly doing and working and fundraising for, and why we sell these t-shirts, because we don't want to be controlled by the same people who oppress us. We don't seek corporate funding. We don't take money from bad people. We don't do these things because we have to remain pure, to create a holistic approach to gun violence, to job training, to even community policing. Because if you've looked at my work, I do not believe in the police system. It was created out of racism, but we do need to have safety in our community, and that comes from community policing. I see the sign for the Q&A, guys. Just let me know when you're ready to start, and I can answer any more questions after that.
Terrific. Thank you so much.
Perfect.
It looks like we have a first question from Sharon, who is one of our community health workers at African Services Committee. And her question for you is, first of all, thank you. How do we make sure we continue the fight after the cameras and the news media have moved on?
I think that's going to require self-regulation. That's going to require that unity, because unfortunately I've seen it, right? And I hate to say it, we're going to see the media, the press, the hashtags, we're going to see them all again as we get close to the general election. As I see the news waves are starting to pick up more BLM stories, whether positive or negative, it's getting back into that. It's to stay true to your community. It's to stay true to yourself and knowing what is wrong and what is right. We've seen the waves we've had with Eric Garner. We've seen the waves that we had with Sean Bell, which was actually the first person who I pounded the pavement for. He was a young Black man who killed the night of his wedding at his bachelor party that night by undercover NYPD officers, the same officers that even years later, people like Eric Adams want to bring back. So to stay committed is to truly commit, and that's the sense of the word. If you think about our ancestors, if you think about the people who came before them, justice was not swift. I told it off how we passed 7 laws as an organization, but it took Martin Luther King over half of a decade to get the Civil Rights Bill Act. It took time. It took a year for the bus boycotts. It took commitment to change. And in that video that I showed you, that truly lied the answer. That's having a blueprint in the community. That's what we're doing with the work of Black opportunities, educating ourselves, but also coming together. I think that people need to look at the golden rule, treating people how you treat yourselves, but in the same way, you need to look and see, if that was my relative, if that was my family, would you want people to care enough? And then you have to know how powerful you are. These politicians, they work for you. That means calling your state senator, calling your congressperson, and just demanding it. It thinks about, it was a quote they used around the house, like a squeaky hen gets the oil. So be noisy, be loud, and absolutely stay committed.
Thank you. And another question that came in is from Natalie Weeks, who is a mental health care counselor and a senior advisor at African Services Committee. And she's asking, sometimes the feeling is that the problem is too huge and too complex, and we feel helpless. How can we feel that we are truly contributing?
I think that's why white supremacy was so powerful and why you still feel the effects of slavery and oppression in this country and around the diaspora, because it happens everywhere. I don't blame people as much as, say, when George Floyd first died, I held a rally in Times Square, which the governor at the time and the mayor tried to shut down, and we bust open the gates, and that tens of thousands, like 40,000 people showed up. And then if I held a rally tomorrow for Louis Montesoro, who is a high school student who's been fighting for his life for a few months here in the Bronx, who was shot in the head while driving a car, people won't show up. It'll be a handful of 30 crazy activists. I don't blame anyone because it's very hard when you're drowning. What I mean by drowning is when you have the rent crisis, when you have a food crisis, a lack of education, when environmental injustice, when oppression happens. It's hard to try to save the world when you really can't, when you're having a rough time saving yourself. But for people, I think that what'll push you and make the problem seem less hard, because it's like, how do you eat a whale, right? One bite at a time. And I think that one bite at a time would start with thinking about what activism truly means. Activism is not always going out to protest every day. As I said early on, is, do you have a neighbor in your community who you could help? Whether that means going to get something from the pharmacy, can you give a few hours to volunteer? Do you know of a job recommendation? Can you organize a quick once a week community cleanup so people have a safe and clean place to live? I think that activism means a lot, and that you're doing the work of, I believe, Nick, if I'm correct, the question was from one of the mental health workers. Right there, that's activism, because you think about the post-traumatic stress of being Black in America as compared to that of a war zone. So anything that you're doing that's for the betterment of Black people, you are tackling the problem. You are a huge piece of the puzzle. And I want you to know and retain that power. You're gonna hear me say power 50 times, but I think that that's how we change the world, when people believe that they can change the world.
I actually have a question, if I may.
Sure, Amanda.
In New York City, for those of you who may not be in New York City right now, we recently voted in our only second Black mayor of New York, Eric Adams, who himself is a former policeman. And I just wonder, has there been any space for dialogue, or do you see any space for dialogue between BLM New York and the mayor's office?
That's a very, very good question. And just to fill and give context around this topic, because it's been a very hot media topic since November. We do have a contentious relationship at this point. Eric Adams was not our choice for mayor. Dating back, if you Google me and him, it's a New York Times article that was released during the primaries, where I didn't believe that someone who loved the police so much could ever truly care for Black people and Black voters. He called several times for an endorsement that we could not give, and he ensured that he would be the best person for Black people. So November comes about. This is a few months after when he'd actually won the general election, and we demanded a meeting with him. We pulled up at his office, bullhorns blazing, leather Black Panther jacket, and it was just between the mask mandates, the job loss, the housing crisis. So we had a meeting with him, and in that meeting, we laid out Black opportunities. We laid out an end to gun violence. We laid out an end to NYCHA and all the other woes that are plaguing our community. And it just wasn't heard. It kind of fell on deaf ears, and I didn't feel respected as a woman in that room, as a civil rights leader, and it just became contentious from that point. So when asked immediately after the meeting by the press, how would we feel if if Eric Adams brought back police who wore plain clothes? This was the start of the fight. Now you have to know that the New York City plain clothes unit is the people who killed Amadou Diallo. Okay, when he was reaching for his wallet, an African immigrant man who had a bright orange wallet, he was shot over 40 something times. They're the same unit who killed Sean Bell and the same unit who used Eric Garner. Having white men and women who come from the suburbs and do not live in our communities, put them into whatever their version of hip hop clothing is, allow them to ride around unidentified and stop any Black or brown person, as we've seen with Louis Montessori, the Catholic school student I discussed, is just not going to be great. So yes, we absolutely said that that policy will lead to bloodshed, riots, and the shutting down of the city. And to be completely transparent, I thought when that fight first started, it's like we go back and forth and find some kind of common ground. But ever since then, whenever the mayor needs to, and I'm still open, because overall, no matter how I may feel about him personally, if it's something for the betterment of the Black community, I'm down for it. But you can't go around building a name for yourself and gaining allies by tearing down a Black organization who has done so much. Whenever his message is falling on dry ears when asked about the mass shooter, he blames BLM. So to be real with you, it's very hard to work with someone who does not operate with integrity. But if he found some, we'd be more than willing to come back to the table.
Wow, thank you. I was afraid.
Yeah, you got the raw story, right? You got like the good page 6 story for that one.
Right, I was afraid that might have been the answer, but God bless you for trying, girl. Wow. So we are actually coming to the end of this symposium. I would like to ask if anyone has any last minute questions or statements to please post them now. But failing that, Chivona, thank you so very, very much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, that it's such a beautiful day, and given what you've been talking about, I feel like I just need to get on the street and find a march or a rally somewhere.
Right on.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there are many, many reasons to rally and march still, particularly when it comes to our community's issues. So thank you very, very much for joining us. Thank you to all the participants who've been able to join us this morning. And any last words, Chivona?
I know you want to know how to get involved. You can go to theblackopsopts.com. My social media, you'll find all that good stuff there is New York, the full word, Bonni, VONNI, and take back your power. There are many clauses, there are many ways, but if you're doing anything right now to help the betterment of the Black community, stand up and give yourself a round of applause, because it's a hard road. The war is very far from won, but we owe it to ourselves, our children, and our ancestors to keep going. Black power.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, people. Have a wonderful Monday, wonderful week, and please join us next month as we hear from Dr. Sowadago, who is an associate professor of cinema studies and Black studies here at the City College of New York. So again, Chivona, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you
Bye-bye,
to
guys.
everyone who managed to join us, and have a wonderful, safe, and healthy week. Bye-bye.